All right, how's everybody doing?
Great.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're excited to see everyone. Welcome to our conversation on mental health.
Hey,
That we
nurse, how you doing?
have. Please mute your phones. Welcome to our conversation on mental health that we have every month. And I'm asking everybody that's watching on social media if you all could do me a favor and go ahead and share the post. I would be extremely appreciative. I think we're gonna have a really good conversation today. And so now I'm going to place it in the hands of one of our co-coordinators for our mental health ministry, Sister Roxalina Rawls. It's in your hands, madam.
Good evening, everyone. First, giving honor to the Lord and Savior of my life, and welcome to our monthly conversation on mental health. My name is Roxalina Rawls, mental health counselor, and Katrina Rawls Hernandez, are you on? Okay, I guess she hasn't signed on yet.
I am.
Okay.
Hello.
Okay, we are the co-coordinators of the Greater Bethel AME Church Mental Health Ministry. I'd like to thank Pastor Rawls for this wonderful opportunity where the faith-based community and mental health is a collaboration between the pastor and therapists. As these two entities come together, our hope is to reduce the stigma related to mental health and account for the spiritual and the medical dimensions as our people, especially Black men, seek wellness care for themselves and for their families. We also have two other mental health professionals joining us this evening. And Jamisa Lee, are you on? Okay, I guess she hasn't signed on yet.
She's on.
But she is?
Yes.
Okay, she is. All right.
I'm here.
Okay. Who is a registered mental health counselor intern. Ms. Lee has her own business, which is Uplifting Counseling and Consultant, LLC, here in Gainesville. And also Mrs. Dale George Harris, a licensed mental health counselor and owner of D.G. Harris Enterprise, a private counseling practice also in Gainesville, Florida. I would like to extend a welcome to both of you and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us this evening. Ladies, feel free all to jump in at any time to share your opinion and your expertise. So our topic this evening is a conversation with Black men on mental health. And our video guests are Donald Grant, Dr. Donald Grant, a trained psychologist who is now in higher education, Harold Paranoid, and is an accomplished actor, and he's been in the business for over 30 years, and Ken Duxworth, who is the Chief Medical Officer for NAMI. And NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Health, or Mental Illness. After this video, my presentation will cover some key video highlights, and I will be looking for your feedback and dialogue at that time. So let's get started. I'm excited about this evening, and Pastor, if you could start the video for us.
Hi, this is Dr. Ken Duckworth. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We're very fortunate to have two guests today to help us understand more about the Black mental health experience. Our guests are Dr. Donald Grant and Harold Perrineau. And I want to thank you and just start by having you introduce yourselves a little bit. How do you touch upon this experience? And what do you have to say to our viewers?
Donald, would you like to start, Dr. Grant? Sure. I'm Donald Grant. I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, but I don't practice anymore. I'm in higher education, and I'm excited to be here with NAMI today because there's so many nuances and very intense risk factors that impact mental health in the Black community. And for an organization that's led by consumers, you all are doing the work right on the ground to be able to hear the needs of the people. And so I think this is a great opportunity to share this conversation and to really get to the root of some of the concerns regarding Black mental health, particularly with Black men in this specific instance.
And my name is Harold Perrineau. I am an actor. I've been an actor for over 30 years. Most recently, I've been on a television show on TNT called Claws, where I play a character whose name is Dean. And Dean is an autistic man. And I am here because I've been an advocate for mental health and mental health concerns in the Black community and misdiagnosing and misunderstanding it. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this character is because I thought having a character like this in your homes every week, maybe some people will, instead of seeing it as a threat, see it as someone they understand or know, and open up the conversation that way.
And so many people can relate to, living with an autistic spectrum disorder.
Yes.
Right. And so your capacity to convey that, which is, pretty remarkable, is a way for people to identify with things. Dr. Grant, I want to start with you. It's well established that men in general are less likely to seek help and are much more likely to end up with bad outcomes like suicide. Could you take that lens and focus it more on the Black male experience?
I think that's a wonderful question. When we look at how mental health operationalizes itself and we kind of drop that inside toxic masculinity or any type of masculinity, many of us have been trained early on not to be able to access our feelings. Many boys are raised being told, you're not supposed to cry, you're not supposed to emote. And we know that crying is actually one of the biological abilities that we have to literally release stress from our bodies. And so I think that's the first thing as it relates to general masculinity. And then we have the injuries associated with interpersonal and structural racism that really even make it more challenging for Black men to really access the words or the thoughts, because there may be a risk to a loss of social capital or physical capital if in fact you engage in this space and are honest about what this looks like for us. And I don't want to minimize also the systems of the healthcare world that have disenfranchised Black people across history. There's a great book called Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington that speaks to how these things have happened. And so when we add on top of the environment, racism, and the mistrust that many of us have with the mental health community, which there's evidence to demonstrate there's some truth to it. The Tuskegee experiment was within the living memory. And even today, we don't have enough Black clinicians and we don't have enough non-Black clinicians who are culturally, empathically trained to work with Black folk. And so I think the combination of all those things together really makes it challenging, a challenging pathway forward for Black men to seek and get appropriate help.
Dr. Grant, when I'm asked in Boston, can you find me an African-American clinician for my son, for my family member? I'm literally operating on two hands, right? In terms of the number of people that I know and trust who are fabulous. So let's think about workforce, how do we create it so that more people want to choose this as a vocation or a calling, if you will, to be in service to the community, because obviously they understand the cultural experience in a way that even a culturally humble, non-Black person will have trouble with.
We need people with the lived experiences. And I think that, what artists like Harold are doing are kind of breaking those stigmas inside the household so that historically, there was a comedian years ago who said the only mental health disorder that's ever existed in the Black community was a nervous breakdown. And in reality, Uncle Johnny had bipolar disorder, bipolar concerns. It wasn't a nervous breakdown, but because we have not always been fortunate to have language to these things.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody like Harold Perrineau who's saying, I'm going to play this character and I'm going to do it with integrity, and I'm going to speak to doctors and learn about it and speak to people with autism and parents and really bring this literally positive image of this into people's households. Now people are forced to talk about it. Now you have this 9-year-old boy who sees this character and sees his friend who has autism at school, and it's not a fear thing because it's
That's
now
right.
because he's seen it in his home, and now he may aspire to be a clinician, and so it starts really early.
Yeah, the modeling is important. And I just want to mention the bipolar disorder. There's quite a literature demonstrating that clinicians misdiagnose Black men, overcall schizophrenia, undercall mood disorders. And again, there's so much to be humble about in this line of work. I want to shift gears. Harold, I want to ask you about your experience of doing this role and what that's meant to you personally, and how you've experienced the conversations you've had with people who've seen you.
Well, thank you for asking me about it. And, when I was younger, I actually have a cousin I grew up with, and he and his sister mostly grew up together because they lost their dad when they were very young. And he was severely autistic, though we didn't have the words for it at the time. We had no idea what those words were. He wasn't verbal. He grunted and moved sort of his fingers a lot, but he understood everything, and they had an amazing relationship. So for me, when this role came up, when this idea came up, I thought it was really, really interesting for me to get in there and try to do it and to really serve it and to serve the character as honestly as possible, because not only my cousin, but many other men in the community, there were sometimes you'd see them, they're walking around, you go, oh yeah, there's something wrong with that dude. That's about the entirety of the language we would have at the time. And that to me doesn't make any sense. That doesn't, I don't have, I'm not a doctor, but I can see like there's something really, there's a person who actually needs help. And so for me, it was really interesting and important to go and talk and to be present and to bring this character Dean to life, to really give him a humanity that people could understand. That's what I like. What
was the hardest thing about portraying that character? I like asking actors interesting questions like that because I have no acting talent of any kind. But you have to really understand it from the inside in order to be it.
I don't know that I understand a lot of it. I know that one of the things that happened that was really helpful for me was understanding that autism was your response to
here's you some water. I'm gonna go
stimuli
make you a sandwich and
overly
some graham crackers.
I understood
Would you
that
like
any
some
kind of
juice
stimulus,
or
touch,
a ginger ale
sound,
to go with
auditory, that you are overly stimulated, and that to me was easy to relate to. So in playing Dean, I played a character who's very, very sensitive about what he wears, about who he talks to, about the attention that he can pay to a person, what he sees in a person's eyes. And so that's for me where I started off. And I just, I gave myself the opportunity to really be overstimulated anytime someone spoke to me. Even the way that you're looking at me now, I could perceive it as really aggressive and have to find ways to try to, deal with it myself. So as the actor, kind of constantly working and moving, and hopefully that's me understanding a little bit about what it's to live with autism in a day-to-day basis.
That's what people do describe that, right? Their filter for stimuli is impaired.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I want to switch gears and ask both of you a bigger picture question about trauma. Yes. Obviously, trauma is a big part of the Black male experience, and witnessing some of these catastrophically horrific videos, I think for the people in my life who are of color, has been quite traumatic. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that and how that fits into the mental health experience of Black men and what we can do about it.
It's a great question, and it's so important that we ask that question. When we talk about intergenerational trauma, we're talking about a trauma that has existed inside of our bodies for generations, and the new research on epigenetics speaks to it very broadly, and it's some amazing work. And then when you take that, it's highly activated in a setting where we're still experiencing contemporary traumas related to the exact same construct. I facilitated a call yesterday with some kids talking about racism, and a little black boy asked, he said, well, if this was a problem and our parents were fighting against it, why is it still a problem? And it was just such a profound question coming from a 12-year-old little boy who sees adults with this level of agency that we don't have to really dismantle this. And so when we talk about trauma, it's really this chronic, complex trauma that comes from our race-based experiences, and it's now being measured in hair cortisol samples in a variety of spaces to demonstrate that this chronic trauma is having a huge impact on us. Now, I don't want to come from a deficits-based angle, because in some of us, it's creating a great deal of post-traumatic growth, and we don't want to minimize that. But we also want to acknowledge the fact that for a lot of people, it's becoming debilitating. And then you add to the fact that we're consistently seeing the replay of our murder esoterically over and over and over again. I have a reaction when I watch, George Floyd dying, when I watch that knee on the neck. It's a visceral reaction for me, because it's activating historical trauma and contemporary trauma, understanding that it's continuing. And so for me, it's really important that we recognize that exists. And then we add the microaggressions to them, where something as innocuous as me walking into Nordstrom and not being served the way I feel like I should, that triggers the bigger pieces of the trauma when you get those microaggressions. And so it's important that we recognize that Black men and women are walking around in the world that is highly dangerous. I mean, the people who killed Breonna Taylor have still not been brought to justice. And that says something when you're traumatized and the world around you doesn't support you in fixing or remedying or even addressing that trauma.
There's no acknowledgement of the agency of the action, right?
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
So,
can I add something?
Harold, I'm interested in your thoughts about this same question from perhaps a different perspective.
Yeah, well, one of the things that Dr. Grant's talking about, like being able to look at it and see it on TV and empathize with it and feel it. One of those things that I've been curious about or been thinking about quite often recently is how the experiences for people like me, who not only see it on television, but have lived through this experience, where the response is, oh, I remember the time when I was leaving the theater and I was walking down the street and two police officers threw me up against the wall because they thought I looked like someone, but I literally was just walking out of a theater. That kind of very personal trauma is stuff that we don't actually often talk about. And so that's why this conversation, I feel, is so really, really important, because not only what we're seeing out there, but what we are living consistently day after day after day as a whole, that maybe we can start to heal some of that. What were you calling intergenerational trauma? Is that what you called it, Donald? We can start healing some of that, because it's very, very personal for many Black men, women, children walking around right now. It's not just what we see on television, but what we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Duckworth, I want to add two really quick things, just really quickly. If we look currently, when we talk about racism, sexism, all these different things, there's two data points that we can look at in contemporary America that demonstrate what this is, right? The deaths of women and babies on the birthing tables, the maternal death rate and infant death rate of Black women and babies is a telltale sign of the level of racism. The other thing we can look at is the current high degrees of murders of Black trans women. Those create this level of intersection of homophobia, transphobia, cis privilege, toxic masculinity, racism. All those things come together, and we're seeing them operationalize themselves in so many different data points. And so when we talk about the trauma, it's oftentimes hard for people to understand how that's quantified. And there's not a lot of efforts put into prevention and early intervention. But when we look at some of these data points that exist in the world, including over-incarceration of Black and brown men, we see these traumas being presented. Now, I'm going to add another really quick point in before you move to your next question, is we oftentimes talk about the trauma associated with being oppressed. But what we don't often talk about is the trauma of existing in the role of the oppressor over generations. And so when you look at old pictures of lynchings, you're seeing 11-year-old girls standing at the foot of a Black man who was set on fire and hanged from a tree. I have a 10-year-old son. He would pass out if I took him to something like that. And so what we don't talk about is that intergenerational experience of trauma for white folk who have been identified in this oppressor role, and that the fact that that little girl standing at the foot of that lynching is now the grandmother of a college student.
Right.
And so if we really want to talk about dismantling the risk factors that impact mental health for Black men and women, we also need to talk about the individuals who purposefully or not purposefully create injuries for us that make it more challenging to remedy the ills of history and the contemporary injuries. So I think that's a really important point to make.
Very important. Thank you.
The second part to
I wanted
this.
to ask you to define epigenetics. Just for our audience, I know the concept involves the impact of environment and biology, but I wanted you to develop that because it's a very important concept.
It is. It is. We historically didn't know that trauma lived inside of our DNA. We knew it impacted our body. We have some great research on that. But through the research on indigenous populations, we've learned that DNA, not the structure necessarily, not the nucleotides, but the performance of the DNA is impacted. So when individuals experience trauma, it creates these additional folds in the DNA that are oftentimes called reconstructed areas. And that impacts how the DNA presents itself to talk about hormone production or distribution in the way that a quote unquote neurotypical person would operate. For instance, with re-regulation, the DNA would prompt something to happen to bring in those dopamine molecules inside the synaptic space and say, okay, the threat is gone, you're cool now. Epigenetics may make it such that the DNA does not direct the hormone process in that same way. And what research is showing now is that historical experiences with trauma can create those epigenetic folds that result in a different functionality of the entire body. And it's so frightening to watch. We see what's happening with our First Nations brothers and sisters, and we look at the substance abuse, all the outcomes, and they're highly related to the history of trauma that the colonists placed on them during colonization.
Right. So in mental health, we've wasted a lot of time. Is it nature or is it nurture? And of course, the answer is it's both.
Right.
That it has to be both, that environment impacts biology. Biology impacts environment in some cases, and you're making the very important point that the historical discrimination, racism, and trauma is also a feature of this equation.
Yeah, but think about the number of Black men who have mental health concerns that are murdered on the street by police officers or other entities because there has been no images of like Harold just said, he wanted to bring humanity to this character. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that thought, because the reason why so many people are dying from white supremacy in the streets. And I use white supremacy very specifically because those tropes are what lead us to not seeing Black men in a variety of ways. And Harold plays this character with such compassion that it's going to force somebody to think twice about how they treat a Black man with a mental health concern or what they see as a mental health concern.
Yeah, let's develop that idea just a bit before we close.
Okay.
How do you think your portrayal is helping people break up a trope, right? Break up a preconceived notion?
I have a bit of a long answer, but not too long. So
we'll take it. We'll take it.
I'm a kid who grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in a very a mostly poor African American part of Brooklyn, and I went to a college in Virginia, in a very, very small town, and I was introduced to things that I hadn't ever been introduced to before. Literally things as simple as someone living in a house where I lived in an apartment, like those things. And quite early on in my career and in my life, I realized that once you get to know something, or you get to know someone, you suddenly have a new understanding about that thing, a very personal understanding about that. And one of the reasons I love being an actor and doing some of the things that I do is because I like to take the things that I've felt from people quite often when they consider me a little less than human, is I like to turn it around and then introduce them to a human being that they'd love to hang out with.
Yes.
That they wouldn't mind being in their living room every day. And then the hope is that you start to see these human beings in a wide array of in a wide variety of circumstances, and you can relate to them. And so that's really what I was hoping with Dean. I was hoping that, you'll see somebody maybe having some sort of episode, and you won't think, oh, that's a violent man. I remember.
Right, there it is.
That
right.
Dean is overstimulated, and he's probably not trying to hurt anybody. He's probably not really sure how to deal with what's happening to him. Maybe I don't want to shoot. Maybe I don't want to call the police. Maybe I don't want to assume that he's going to hurt me, and maybe I can actually even help. And so that's been my idea as an actor, and my idea specifically for this character. Like bring some kind of humanity in your living room, right where you sit. And that's hopefully what we get a chance to do weekly.
That's a great answer. And the literature on how we break down our stereotypes in the mental health field is contact with people makes a difference.
Yes.
Yep.
Connecting with someone who has something that you have a preconceived notion about, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. What does a person with OCD or autism look like? And the contact, it's like, oh, that person's actually a lot like me, right? And from a diagnosis point of view, and you're making the same point,
right?
That, if you can really take in the person, you'll be different at the end of the transaction.
Right. And can I say this before you?
Yeah, please.
I'm so glad about groups like NAMI, and I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. And I really just hope that people really take the opportunity to use your services and go and find and get help and feel like it's okay to get help. I'm just so glad that NAMI is around and that it's that it's been around since 1979 or something. And,
yeah, we're on our 40th year anniversary. So
I'm just glad you're there, and really I hope that people come, use your services, donate money, and do all. You really are. It's really a great thing that you're doing out in the world for Black people, for non-Black people, for the community of mental wellness.
Thank you for saying that. One of the pieces I want to add to that is many people experience the service system as fragmented, chaotic. State hospital beds are being closed. We over-incarcerate not only Black males, but African American who have mental illnesses and non-African Americans who have mental illnesses, right? Correctional centers are big parts of our mental health system. One of the beauties of NAMI is that we support each other as a peer community. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to get a good doctor. That doesn't mean that there probably isn't a treatment that might help you. But the point is, while you're working to find that elusive thing in an underfunded, chaotic, and I have to use the word system in quotation marks, right? You cannot feel alone. You can feel joined and connected with people who get it. And that's the beauty of NAMI, and I thank you for saying that. Before we close, I want to ask each of you to think about a message. You like people who took the time to watch this conversation. What's your message for the audience? And it doesn't have to be a tiny answer, you know, as we've discussed, Harold, because that long answer was a beautiful answer. Let's start with Dr. Grant.
I echo everything Harold just said as well. My message for the audience is twofold. And the first component is to really look at how our behaviors negatively impact the mental well-being of other people. Understanding that nothing happens in isolation and everything is a part of a system. When we look at what's happening right now in the world with anti-Black racism, it has to be understood that this is a part of a wellness thing, and it's not creating wellness in Black families if we consistently deny the existence of this system. The second thing is that I would encourage Black people to activate resistance against the stigmas of mental wellness. It doesn't mean that you have to go to a quote unquote therapist. You could reach out to an organization like NAMI and get some peer support. You can do yoga, you can exercise, you can meditate, but just pay attention to the fact that you don't go to your minister to get your insulin, you go to your medical doctor. Right. And so in that same way, we want people to engage in activities specifically aimed at supporting mental wellness. And we want Black folk to feel comfortable doing that because we know that legislation and adjudication puts Black people disproportionately with mental illnesses into the criminal justice system, as you just described. When we have depression and anxiety at early on, they're diagnosed as oppositional defiant disorder to pave the way to adjudication. And so I want us all to pay attention to the intersection of racism and mental health so that we can allow our communities to heal more successfully, efficiently, and effectively.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. Harold, I think you're going to get the last word here. And
okay, well, I want to echo everything that Dr. Grant said. I think everything he said is absolutely on point. And the thing I would love for people to take away from here, I was having a conversation with another actress on our show. Her name is Jennifer Lyon, and she was talking about, us taking our mental health and our mental wellness and considering it probably last on the scale of everything we need to do. What if we actually considered it on the scale of the first thing we need to do? What if we used it actually as a tool of actual defiance against the systems? If we actually worked on our own mental health and the mental health of all the people around us, what would that look like? And so what I would really encourage people to do is really consider to taking the time to work on your own mental health. Just like Dr. Grant said, you can do yoga. You don't have to go and see someone. You don't have to see your priest. You can have a conversation with your friend, or you can actually seek help from other peers, from professionals, or whatever that is. And maybe in that is a fight, a resistance fight all in itself. And so that's what I would like people to do. Really.
So you both made the point you have to consider it, think about it, and then connect with others.
Right. That's right.
Whether it's a professional, whether it's a peer, whether it's somebody you love, the idea that making the conversation safe for yourself and in connection.
Right. And it's deliberately about your mental wellness.
Yes. Right. Intentional, right?
Intentional, yes.
Well, I've loved this conversation, and I hope we can stay in touch. I want to thank you both for your wisdom and your generosity with this conversation. And I'm going to ask NAMI how we can stay in touch with you, because you're both leaders. And as the nation is having this conversation in ways that I hadn't seen before, I'm just very grateful to the two of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. All the best.
But take care.
Okay. All right. I just wanted, thank you, Pastor, for putting up the first slide. I just wanted to cover some highlights of that video. And as I cover, I would like to start our conversation and dialogue. So first, the systems of the healthcare world. Challenges: general masculinity in terms of accessing feelings. Are people of color disenfranchised when it comes to healthcare? And what about the medical apartheid from the past? Is that still looming before us? And has the medical exportation of African Americans caused mistrust among patients and the medical industry? I'd like to hear some comments from our men.
I guess not
be able to
I don't necessarily
ease into that change. They change so fast that you don't even know what they're talking about no more. It'd be a whole different language. It's almost like when the guy was talking about dealing with the gums, he was using these big words and all, but when I was coming up, it was just straight up pyorrhea. You don't hear pyorrhea, the gum, no more. They changed that name so fast because that was a word that most underprivileged people understood. So I think our platform in introducing help with mental issues, if we have to ease these names to these people with some type of education, and that TV firm to me just seems like the ideal thing because I know how to react. I live with autistic person in my house. So to be able to do that, I understand certain mood swings. I understand certain ways that somebody that don't live there could be at a distance and think something wrong. You got people right now acting out in the street, but you think they're investing in pulling that person and really getting help, or we put them in jail because we think they're crazy. So I think it's the degrees of levels that now we're getting educated and these brothers are standing up, but I think it's got to be a way they got to be able to, I wouldn't say back up and go back, but be able to, how I tell Reverend Rawls sometime when he use big words and stuff, can you just break it down one more time so people can really get something out of it? That's all I got right now, and that's just what I seen. The help is there, and there's some good stuff going on, but I think we need to break we need to break it down a little bit to be able to, everybody can't understand that language.
Okay.
Hope I
Any,
make sense.
okay, like mental health professionals. Dale, any comment?
Let me unmute. Hello, everyone. It was very good and powerful, a lot of information. And I'm sitting here trying to think of what would be a good couple of nuggets just to throw in.
Mhm.
One, men are not going to sit in a group of men and talk about their feelings. For us women who've been married for a long, long time, how many years did it take your spouse or your boyfriend or your relationship person to even open up? Therefore, that is not a good platform. We have to learn that maybe a man needs more one-on-one wise counsel, if I use that word, to reflect relationship. That does not necessarily mean there are a lot of men whose fathers were not in the home and raised by single family women. However, there might have been someone there who provided that missing link. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a person in the immediate family. And having worked in corrections for quite a bit of I'm so sorry. I apologize for the child. For most of my business career, men are hurting, not only Black men, but men in general. And they're beginning to institute programs and companies to come in and offer the basic counseling or needs, but we're still in an infancy stage. Now, Gainesville has done a great job now of sending out a mental health person on calls when they think there may be a person who's having some problems with mental health issues. However, it's a little bit and not enough, but it is a beginning. One of my dreams is that we could have a mental health council or a mental health summit of the African American counselors. There are many, many, many therapists in this area. We work kind of more individually than collectively, collaboratively. And that could be a beginning to show that we have the numbers to begin a dialogue that would help. Thank you.
Okay. Have you found there are more, we're lacking in terms of males, Black men, taking on this calling as therapists, or where do you see the disparity, so to speak? Are women more apt, men are not in going into this field?
There are quite a bit of male African-American counselors here in Gainesville. Everybody knows Alvin Butler played at UF. He has had a very prosperous practice for a long time here. There are several African-American men and mental health counselors at the Alachua County Jail and in correctional settings. Generally, though, there are more females, though.
Okay, all right. Any other comments? Katrina, would you like to weigh in?
Hello, everyone. I just, I hear and understand, Pastor. I don't think everybody needs a therapist. I think we just need to be kind of in touch with our feelings. And if we ever need something, then we can go to someone. It's definitely beneficial. Just listening to them talking about the microaggressions and things like that have seemed to me that have become bigger issues nowadays that I have seen from the racism and things like that. But definitely with our last mental health information that we got, our Black males are experiencing more trauma. And so we just want to make sure we're wrapping our arms around them and corralling them in and showing them support. So I think it's some good information. Just also about how they're using the correctional institution as a mental health drop-off, which is very sad but true. Just if we could just do better, figure out how to do better with our people, all people, and not just dropping them in a cell because we don't know what else to do with them, or we don't want to invest in trying to make sure that they're better mentally and emotionally.
Okay.
This is Delphine. I think that and believe that the stigma of Blacks in general seeking counseling still exists, and it's very, very high among men. It's been my experience that in all of my years as a counselor and in the mental health system, I had more female clients than I had male clients. And it was also my experience to see that the men only receive the mental health counseling because they're in the correctional system. And I think that played a big role in them today seeking counseling. The other thing I feel is that, getting back to something Reverend Rawls said about men being the head of the house, and I think that I know that there are some Black male counselors, but I think the ratio is way off. There are more females, and then there's a stigma of Black males going to a female for help.
That's a good point. I'm just going to throw this out. Are Black males socialized differently than Black females in terms, or Black boys, are they allowed to cry, so to speak? Is that looked at as a negative? How are they? I have a girl. I've never raised a boy.
Yeah,
I throw that.
I don't think so. I mean, that might have been back in the day. But I know a lot of fathers. I know a lot of dads. I know a lot of black men. We cry. We kiss our sons. We kiss our grandsons. We hug. We do those things. But there's just certain things. People are not going to feminize us. This world is trying to feminize us, and so we go to extremes. We hug. We kiss. We tell our children that we love them. We do all of those things. Um, but um, but we have to make sure that we preserve who we are. The white man is allowed to be a so-called man, but when it comes to the black man, there's literally almost a dehumanization. We have to bow. We can't be strong because of all the things. You don't have emotions. You don't do this. You don't do that. And so it's almost like you don't get an opportunity to be the type of man that your wife and that your children trust, because there's this pressure to be something different than what our forefathers were. We don't do it just like our forefathers. We're not as hard, but they were men and we're men, and and we just have to be careful, because people are trying to do away with our place in the family, doing away with the need for us in the family, and do away with our place and our role in the family. It's almost like they're trying to make the black man extinct. It's not necessary. And when government help, provides assistance, for people with housing or whatever, you can stay there as long as you don't let your man stay there. You can, when you have unjust systems, and we get criminalized for things that other people don't get criminalized. Okay, once that record is there, there's certain things that we can't do, and we can't. Now, how are we gonna trust the same system to tell us what's best for us? I think we know what's best for us, and black women have to be sure that you don't allow people to convince you on what's best for us. All of us aren't perfect, but all of anybody's not perfect. But I know, those stereotypes are lies.
I agree with that. And the social work model from back in the 1800s, when social work started, was that the social worker would come in and make sure that there was no signs of a man living there if the woman and family were living in and receiving assistance. So a lot of this has been around legally for a long time. I wanted to add that I've had 2 clients in the past that only came once or twice and chose not to come, but they were men who were having identity issues, adult, full-born masculine men who were having identity issues. And I realized that they weren't comfortable. And after 1 or 2 visits, they never showed up again. So there's a whole nother part of dealing with Black men and the issues that they may have with their identities for another day and another time.
Thank you for that.
The idea of the stronger we are, the more of a threat, the more there's something wrong with us. The stronger we are, the more opinionated we are. The more we look like our grandfathers, the stronger we are, the more we look like our fathers, the more messed up people perceive us. But we can't allow people that don't have our best interest, to paint that picture when in many times they created the trauma, that caused it, and our women can't allow, because you may get some benefits, from joining the bandwagon. Our women can allow themselves to be convinced, because those people don't have our best interest and don't have our families, the core of who we are, at heart.
Okay. Pastor, could I have slide 2? Okay, thank you. The next slide. All right. Mental health professionals that are culturally trained, people with a lived experience, a calling on the individual's lives to be service to our community. Why is it important in terms of a misdiagnosis? Jamisa, I'd like to hear some feedback from you in terms of how can we create that community that is culturally trained, especially for Black men?
It goes on conversation. You know, we have to talk about it. We can't keep continuing to sweep it under the rug or not address it, because the fact is our Black men needs the same help that someone else may need. They may need that mental help. So we can't allow the way the world works to push them in a box. Oh, you're weak if you go get the assistance, or you're weak if you talk to a counselor. That's not so, because that's a strength you saying about your health. That's only helping you to better provide for your family. Because how can you take care of your family, your wife, your children, if you're not well? So it's starting that conversation just as we're doing today, and tapping into the resources that's out there. You know, Ms. Del Harris mentioned there are other Black males that's therapists. Find one, talk to them, have that conversation. Encourage some of our young Black men that's coming up to go into the field so that that presence is there.
Thank you. Thank you. Slide 3, Pastor, please. How does the trauma impact our Black men? And of course, they made the point there has been a lot of post-traumatic growth, which is positive, but the intergenerational trauma, dismantling the trauma, historical and temporary trauma is activated. George Floyd, the knee on the neck, microaggression was as far as a Black man. Some of these things that men have experienced, and I would be interested to ask the question, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with, and I just saw something just recently within the last 30 days, where this Black man and his son, 10-year-old son, went into a Dillard's in Texas. And the Black man, young Black man, decided that he wanted to try on some clothing. And he asked the sales clerk, who happened to be an older white gentleman, where was the dressing room? And as the Black man, young Black man, was walking away, the elderly white man mumbled, effing Negro. And the Black man turned around and he addressed the issue right there. Microaggression, and he was able to address it in a very civilized, calm manner. And he ended by saying, "You have left me with this situation to go home and explain this to my young son." So point that I'm making is, how do as Black men, how do you deal with situations such as that? And if it's presented before one of your young sons, what do you do in that particular situation?
I think the brother handled it good. You don't cower, and you're an example for your son. What we have to realize is that we're smarter. No one wants to admit it. No one will say that to us, but we're smarter. And so we have to use our heads. And when I worked for Anheuser-Busch, back in the late 80s and early 90s, it was a planter factory, and so you had to wear earplugs. You couldn't hear anything. And the only reason that they hired me out there, because the federal government pressured them, because they pay great salaries but had very few Black people, and our EEOC in Alachua County was asked to assist them. So I'm out there, and so now I'm in a situation, and this white boy walked past my area, and with his lips he said nigga, and I wasn't very smart back then, and so I literally came around and grabbed him by the throat, and all he did was threw his hands up in the air and fell back. And then so he went into the office of the supervisor. As soon as when he fell back, I knew what he had done, and he went into the supervisor's office and showed he had my handprints around his neck, and then the supervisor, because I was a really good employee, said, hey, if you can just go home and cool off for the night, we're not gonna do anything, but you can't do that. And at that point right there, I realized it's a head game. We are already smarter, but we have to be smarter. We have to be wiser. And so, but doesn't mean you have to be a coward and bow. And I think that guy, he was a great example for his son. He didn't make himself small, but he showed that he was wiser and smarter. But he also confronted and addressed the man. And I think that's what we have to do. Many of our men are almost taught and I think some of our older generation had to do it to survive, but to almost not look them in the eyes, and that we can't continue to raise a generation that can't look them in the eyes. We're smarter, we're wiser, and we have to show that to our young men if we're to have a trajectory going upwards.
I agree. I totally agree. Any other feedback on that? Okay. Our next slide, the data points. All right. And they've touched upon this in our video, over incarceration of Black and brown men, oppressors over generations, and the example that was used about that 11-year-old white girl experiencing a lynching, who is now a 80-year-old woman with a college student. So we're not only talking about the individuals that were oppressed, but the individuals that are the oppressors, who still may be walking around thinking that it's okay to continue with this type of behavior. Our world is not fixing this trauma. In some cases, they're ignoring it. They're, as Pastor said, as Black men, to stand against it, and do it in a civilized, intelligent way, rather than wanting to be aggressive and go in.
I don't like that word civilized.
Well, when I say, let me just change that word and use it in terms of a headway, where you use your head rather than emotions to take and correct what the wrong has been done.
Are women criticized for being emotional?
I beg your pardon?
Are women criticized for being emotional, or demeaned or belittled for being emotional?
No.
I know I have been. I don't know about other women. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know that I have, and women, I don't know, other women may want to speak for themselves, but I know I have been, yes.
Yeah, it just
I
kind of
don't
bothers
think
me.
to the extent that men have been criticized.
Right.
It just bothers me if a Black man is aggressive, he's looked at as uncivilized, but when a white man is aggressive, he's a man. And I don't buy into that. And so, yeah, I might need to make sure I control my emotions, but just because I get emotional does not make me inhuman or uncivilized or animalistic. And I don't accept that notion. It's like we have two different standards that we're to operate by, and then we're to, you got to look down. And so if I'm emotional, I don't think it means that I'm uncivilized. Maybe I just have a little bit more maturing to do, but I'm civilized.
Yeah, I agree in using your mental capacity and ability. Okay. Let's go to the next slide, Pastor. Epigenetics, which I think is an interesting concept, and I had not heard of that before. Trauma lies in our DNA. Will one of our mental health professionals like to speak to that? Are there any feelings in terms of what has happened to us in the past generations that may be passed on to some of that may be in our DNA? I throw that question out. Is there a possibility?
I think as the younger generation receive more education, they're going to learn about these things. And I say that because one of my grandsons had a class, and in that class, he learned about things that happened, way back when in the past. And it disturbed him to the extent that he came to me and he said, "Is this how people were treated?" And I guess the kind of sad part about this is that this particular grandson is, if he probably don't consider himself this, but he is multiracial. And he said, "This really how people treated Black folks?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, and all he could say was, "Wow." Now, I think he got a C in the class because I think he kind of got turned off about it. But, I think because things have happened to Black men that, some feel that, just like Reverend Rawls was saying, they treated us like this. And so, that's hard to live down. So yeah, I think it is in the DNA. That's just my thought.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments, feedback? Okay.
I don't believe it's in the DNA. I believe that if my great grandfather had a problem where he was sexually molested, and because of that he acted out in certain ways, and he never got help for his problem. And his son grew up and saw the way that he was behaving, and then know better and started acting like him. And then his son passed it on, not from the DNA, but from a behavioral point of view. I believe that's where the problem is, because no one got help from the great-grandfather or even their great-great-grandfather that was back in this time of slavery. And I believe it was just passed down, but not for the DNA. I believe it's just a behavioral problem. I believe it's a behavioral problem that was never taken care of. But I don't believe it's in the DNA.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. And our last slide, nature versus nurture. The nature, genetics, physical appearance, biological influence, or nurture, part of our environment, upbringing, or social influence. What's your feedback on that? Katrina?
I agree with what they talked about in the video, that obviously it's both. There are some genetic and biological influences, but it also, depends on where you grow up. Like Sister Thompson said, if you see that behavior, you learn that behavior, and now it's a behavioral thing and it's never corrected. Like that's part of your upbringing, your environment. But then there are physiological things that also affect, I think.
Any other comments? Jamisa?
Well, my thoughts are is that in the end we have to survive. We have to survive, and we have to do what we have to do to survive. And so I think those that came before us, before my generation, they did what they had to do to survive. They showed us, their sons, what they needed to show us to survive. And then as we progress or move forward or move, um, we do what we have to do to survive. And back to what I'm saying, we cannot bow and buy the stories of those who could care less about our survival. And so when I look at the nature versus nurture, there's some things that are natural to us. But as we grow, I mean, we're still going to survive. And we're going to be in different places. And so where there's men that are completely bought in and they will do everything that was said, but there are a whole lot of us. There's a whole lot of us who are pretty much silenced. People don't want to hear the way we talk. People don't want to hear our concepts. But we're trying to survive. We're trying to make sure our children are raised strong. Our young men are raised to be strong black men. Our young girls are respectful of themselves, are strong women, uh, and and we're going to do and teach what it takes for us to survive as a people and the village. And so I agree with Trina that it's the nature and the nurture, some things that we have to deal with that we have a part of us, but we can nurture our way out of some defects that were caused.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Because, Sister Roxy, let me give you just an example. When my two youngest boys were, I think it was 8 and 10 or 8 and 9,
Mhm.
my ex-husband, their dad walked off for a younger woman and left them. When Thanksgiving came, my one son called him and he said, well, you always spend Thanksgiving with us. You're not going to spend this Thanksgiving with us? He said, I have a life now and you find a life. This boy was only 9 years old.
Mm.
So it bothered them all their lives. And what happened is my son decided it's not going to happen with his children. He stopped it right there.
Mm.
He became a husband, a very good father. And he said, regardless of what happened in his marriage, he is going to hold on there. He's going to see his children grow. He stopped that right there.
Mm.
You understand what I'm saying? He
Right.
stopped right there. So what it talk about the black man, how they bring our black man down. Sometimes they look at some things that happen that's negative, but the positive ones don't really get what they really that crown on their head, I would call it, that it should get. We have good black men. We have good black men out there. So some of the things that they talk about our black men and put them down, they need to rethink. And we women lift our black men up.
Always.
And cherish them.
Always.
Don't put them down. That's what the white man wants. Lift our black men up. We want to cry, we go in the bathroom, we cry, we come out, we wash our face. But never talk to them about our black men. I'm getting a little annoyed, but I'm going to shut up. Go ahead.
It's good stuff. Keep talking. Any other comments or dialogue before we close out this conversation? It's been very good. Any other comments, feedback?
Yeah, Sister Roxy, I just want to ride behind Sister Thompson, what she was saying. And I had to realize this myself as being a father, and a lot of things that I did in my life that I thought were bad, but I made the sacrifice. God used me to sacrifice things that sons want to be like their daddy. But I tell my son, these are the things you don't want to be like your daddy. What she experienced with her husband and this young lady and all these things her son seen, it seemed bad. But we got to realize in life as men, some things have to happen. Sometimes we don't have the educational way to show our boys how to be men. Sometimes we don't have those resources to show our boys how we have to be men. So God will turn that thing around and make something looks bad, but he just showed your son how to be a man, because that's the only way he knew about how to show him in this environment, in this social influence that don't do it as I do. Man, this is not the right way to treat a woman. This is not the right way to do it. I'm sorry your mother had to be the one that I had to show you with, but it had to be shown, and this all that I had. What I just showed you, that's all that I had. When I went to jail and I did these things with drugs, when I did this, I sacrificed my body, my own body, to show my son how to be a man and not to do this. So I think God has a way of showing us how to show our boys how to be men in a way we think that's negative. But in God's eyesight, it's not negative. Everybody wins, because this is just not the way how you treat a woman. This, don't you never put your hand on a woman. This is the end result. Don't you never drink too much. This is what, when they say that we die in our sins and don't get caught dirty, you smoke, cancer. You drink, cirrhosis of the liver. So all these things, we are showing them in a way that God is showing us. All we have is what we can show them, not to do these things. That's the way I look at life. That's just all I got, Sister Roxy.
I appreciate your feedback. And I would like to thank everyone for joining in with the dialogue and the conversation tonight. I would like to have more of these conversations regarding Black men and mental health counseling. I think it's helpful for all of us. We're learning. So, Pastor, I'll let you have the last word.
All right. I think the conversation was really good. I just want to encourage the women that we talk to each other. When we were at the marriage retreat a couple weekends ago, when the men went off on our own, we talked. You'll never know what we talked about, but we talked. And so when we're together, we have good, strong, relevant,